Wow, that is an echo. Welcome everyone to the regular monthly Planning Commission meeting. We convene this meeting at 7:02 p.m. on August 19th. Thank you all for being here. This remains one of the big topics in our borough, that is rezoning. And this is a little bit unusual for the Planning Commission in that we do not have any regular business as far as subdivision or land development. This entire meeting, more or less, will be devoted to taking input from the community related to rezoning and then also working through several of the sections. So thank you for being here. We convene our meeting, and now we will review and approve the agenda. The first item is that we will approve our minutes from July 15th. There will then be opportunity for public comment. Please, if you could, try to keep your public comment to within 5 minutes so that we have enough time for everyone, but you are welcome to make public comment. And if you could, because once again, we are privileged to have community media here to film our meeting, and it would be helpful if you spoke from that microphone over there so that they can hear and see you. After public comment, we will move to new business since there is no tabled old business, and we have 3 items under new business. The first is to review the open house that we held in this room on July 29th. And thanks to our planning director and zoning officer, John Whitmore, we have a write-up of all of the items that individuals came and offered at that public meeting. And so this will be a chance not to review each of them in turn, but to deal with them and understand them as a whole and how they might reflect on what our business is today. After that, we will go and think back to our last Planning Commission meeting, which was July 15th. There were some items at that meeting which we recommended to staff for potential updated language, and some other things that we decided to deal with at a future time. We may not deal with those today, but we want to acknowledge them so that we keep them on the agenda and we'll revisit them at a future meeting. Then the last thing is the big item for today, which is to begin our discussion regarding sections 2 and 3, zoning district and land use regulations of the 2023-2024 zoning ordinance revisions as provided by the completed initial draft document. So what we are doing here is starting to move through each of Gettysburg's proposed zoning districts. And while we are looking at them, to also get a chance to see what their uses are, what their boundaries are, and to make comment that will help to eventually form the recommendation that this commission makes to Borough Council. We will not complete this task tonight. I can't imagine that we will because of the number of zoning districts, but we will begin that process, and at an hour that appears to be the right hour to conclude, we will just move on and begin that again at our next business meeting next month. There are some announcements about when we will meet again, including when we will have another opportunity for the public to make comment, not in a business meeting format, but in more of a question and answer kind of town hall experience. Planning Commission members will then have an opportunity to make any comments they wish to make before concluding with public comment. So that is our agenda for this evening. Do any planning commissioners wish to ask questions or make changes to today's agenda? Is there a motion to approve our agenda for today?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So John moves and Sarah seconds. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes 5 to 0.
We do have 5.
5 to 0. I should have mentioned earlier that we are minus 1 Planning Commission member, Nick Redmond. So Jenny Dumont, our alternate member, is participating fully in today's meeting. So that motion passed to approve the agenda 5 to 0. How about the minutes from July 15th, 2024? Are there any corrections or questions about those minutes?
I have none. I'll make a motion to approve the July 15th meeting minutes.
Thanks, Sarah. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so Sarah moved and John seconded. Are there any additional comments related to those minutes? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, I vote aye. Opposed? And that motion passes 5 to 0. This is now an opportunity for public comment on anything that you wish related to items on the agenda, which includes Section 2 and 3 of the zoning ordinance, as well as anything that was brought up on July 29th or July 15th. And please go to the podium if you could. Thanks, Sue.
I'm Sue Sipperly. I live at 314 North Stratton Street, and I did send you some more detailed comments in your packet, but there were 3 sections on the map that I was puzzled by, I guess you'd call it. One is changing the general commercial where the fire hall is, and that stretch with the Americana souvenirs and PennDOT. And then behind that, there's condos. And for some reason, it was decided, it's currently zoned general commercial. And it was decided to change that zoning to industrial. And there's the fire hall that has a caterer in there. There's Americana souvenirs, which is industrial, but PennDOT and the condos aren't. So I'd like to know why that was thought to be prudent. Also, on Carlisle Street, the zoning from Water Street to Lincoln Avenue is proposed to be changed from residential office to R2 medium residential. And there are businesses along there. There's student housing that's owned by the college. And if you change that to R2, for one thing, those buildings aren't R2 compatible. But also, you could have the loss of options and values for the existing owners. Like we could use a neighborhood cafe or something like that. And it could also lower property values. Civic institutional zone includes the rec park and military park lands. And those are primarily in sort of the southern half of the borough. There's a long paragraph on the technical dimensional part about the historic district and those requirements, and out of all that green space, there's only 2 parcels that are in the historic district, and they're both associated with the cemetery. So I don't know why that big paragraph has to be in there. And also on the uses in that zone, it says you could have like a 4-story building, and we're talking about the rec park, and it says you can have a government facility in there, including like borough offices. I think that there's a better use in there. I think the first paragraph says just neighborhood assembly. So I think you ought to take a better look at that. And also on the Steiner Avenue proposed commercial zone, there's 2 lots that are owned by the military park. Used to be the Home Street Home Hotel. Those last 2 lots should be green because they're owned by the park. There's one there that's owned by the Battlefield Trust that is not, it's not public, so it shouldn't be green. And then I gave you a little feedback on what the colors, or what the designations are for the different zones. It's getting confusing when you have C for commercial and then CI for civic institutional, and then R for revitalization, but R1, 2, and 3 for residential. So appreciate it if you would take a look at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue, very much. And I just want to remind the Planning Commission that we received some PDFs related to Sue Sipperly's comments that can help us when we get to that part. So thank you.
Sharon Monahan, West Broadway. I actually have a process question. I don't think has been answered yet. In the interest of efficiency, so we had an open house, and there were a lot of members of the public here the last month. And you now have all those written questions, concerns, suggestions. Now, rather than have everyone feel they need to come back to give those comments again in public comment, when will we know what of those comments have been accepted for the new draft?
Thank you, Sharon. And I'm going to turn it to John Whitmore to explain how you collated that information and then shared it with us. And then maybe we can talk about how we might use that information.
I'm going to unfortunately deflect to the borough's solicitor, assistant solicitor at
I
this
am
point.
not the solicitor.
Yeah. I've got, in
I know,
terms of
I
the
know.
sequence, this is public comments. So this isn't a forum for back and forth dialogue until we move on to the item.
Generally speaking, that's good practice. I mean, just to have some structure to your meeting. But I think you can certainly address that question whenever you see fit.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment, John, and I think that this commission has taken an approach where when a question is asked, since typically we don't get a lot of individuals at our meeting, that we do try to address it then. But if you would prefer to wait until a little later, just as long as we answer it, I was just thinking for expediency, we would answer it now.
If Adam's okay with it,
I'm okay with it, John, if you want to be. Yeah.
So in terms of the process then, as it relates to the meeting on the 29th, that was going to be an opportunity for the public. It's basically a second round. So after you've had an opportunity to provide the comments, we're going to discuss those comments tonight. If further clarification is necessary or for other items come up, that's an opportunity then to discuss it with staff. In terms of the draft document, we had planned to have a revised draft by that time, beforehand on the website. That has not happened yet. That's something, if the Planning Commission after tonight's meeting is okay with, we can proceed with the modifications that we've received to date, providing a kind of like a track changes version, so we can show you what's proposed, what the public has proposed, and then what staff would recommend.
Okay, thank you. And maybe if this helps to clarify, but you correct me, John, is that you took the information that was received at that public meeting, that sort of open house meeting, and you and your staff put it in a form that we could all read, and you typed it, and we received it. And so now it's our opportunity to respond to it. And it's really not staff's need to direct our response to that. You've given it to us, so now it's our responsibility to respond, I think, to Ms. Monahan's question. Does that make sense? Does that work? Okay. So hopefully today, at least items related to Section 2 and Section 3, we have the information in front of us, and we'll be able to respond to it as we move through it.
I'll just add one additional caveat. When we begin discussion on item A for tonight, some of the findings from those comments there were a lot of comments, very appreciated, but there's some clear wants from the community that staff will discuss.
Other public comment?
Dave Seitz, Seitz Realty, been here a long time. You're a consultant. One point that Sue made is that some of the zoning districts of what currently exists within the zoning districts is inconsistent with the way it's been applied. Did your consultant do an itemization and analyze and provide an analytic of all the uses in each district, street by street? Did they actually walk the streets? Or did they just stay in Pittsburgh and look at it from afar? because if you take your mission statements in the beginning, and then you take your definitions of each district, your districts are inconsistent. In R2, it's supposed to be two-family and single families. In what you call your neighborhood 1 commercial, it's supposed to be predominant two-family, single families with a mix of commercial or light commercial uses. And as I have pointed out to John and a couple other individuals, if you take certain sections and you break down the actual usage within those districts, it's actually reversed. You have more uses in your R2 that are consistent with N1 than you do the other way around. So I do not believe your consultant did the basic first step of actually identifying the different uses in the current situations, street by street. And if they haven't, I'd recommend you start over.
Thank you, Mr. Seitz. And that was related to the process, and I believe that should come up as we move into Section 2 and Section 3 as well. So maybe we'll be asking a little bit about consultant process in a few minutes.
No problem.
Okay. But we will respond to that in a few minutes. Thank you. Other comments related to agenda items? Okay. Then let's go back to the agenda. And the first item under new business is that we will review the July 29, 2024 public open house meetings and comments. This was the opportunity, the first or second, actually second, I think, for the community to read the proposed rezoning and to make comment in this room about items. So, Mr. Whitmore, would you be able to talk us through a little bit about the crafting of the proposal that we received related to the process for deciding zoning districts?
So this project has been designed as a three-phase. Phase 1 was the utilization of the consultant in conjunction with community members identified, with council, planning commission participation, other members of the public. I think we had a representative from the Adams County Office of Planning and Development. They went through beginning into May 2023, ending roughly in April of this year, reviewing each block, specific changes that they would like to see, and in particular, the thrust of the changes were based on an idea that the borough needs more housing opportunities, and that the very real threat of commercial encroachment into residential areas. So that was what crafted the map. There are, in looking at it, I can see that there's some we have some parcels that could probably be better defined or have different boundary delineations. But overall, especially as it relates to like the Elm Street district, that's currently an overlay district in the zoning ordinance. One of the goals was to get us out of the overlay zoning realm, having baseline districts. When we look at the Elm Street, the biggest challenge we have is related to short-term rentals, and then, like I said, mentioned earlier, the success of commercial development and how that is potentially pushing out residential housing opportunities. Zoning as a tool, and that's what zoning is. It's a tool to make the community more in line with what's proposed in the comprehensive plan. The goal will not the goal, but the active rezoning will result in downzoning of parcels, and as such, that does limit the availability of certain uses. So that's something that's built into the process. We are at this point with the public so that any changes that are requested can be vetted by the planning commission, as the planning commission will then provide the recommendation to ultimately the borough council to make a final decision on the ordinance. So yeah, that's the flyby version of what occurred. It was not a very simple task from what I understand. In my involvement with it, they were very deliberate in looking at these areas. But it is under that lens of residential as opposed to commercial. So that might be creating conflict that's being observed by the public.
And to be fair to you, you came in the middle of this process.
Yeah.
So are you saying that the planning commission, as we move through, and we're in a second going to move through district by district, we will respond to what the consultant provided, but we will also make recommendations that might be different from what the consultant
Of
provided?
course, this is going to be your document.
And we might question the method, but without the consultant here, we don't really have a great sense of the method. So we're left to what we have on the paper.
I would be remiss. Planners, this is a common misconception with urban planners, and Troy Truax, our consultant, he's an urban planner. We don't make plans. We provide the information and the data that we receive from these types of meetings to create the ordinance, to create the comprehensive plan. This is part of the sausage making of legislative duty, so to speak, because we're getting to the hard part of Troy was working with the group, helping them come up with suggestions. Those suggestions are now in front of the public with that May 15th draft that we're all reviewing. And so it's not, I hesitate to say it's really Troy or the consultant that's in charge of this at this point, because it was the borough's design, the borough's process to initiate.
So and I'll stop now and open it up for discussion. As we review the July 29 public open house meeting and comments, we recognize that some of those comments hit at items that this planning commission might not have all the information on how they were created. And we kind of are relying on the borough staff to help us. Without the consultant here, we don't have someone who can answer some of those questions.
Often, what the changes that are, especially, I'll just pick one at random and not very random, it's chickens. That's not coming from like some desire from the consultant. That's best practices that we're finding in our profession. Is it gonna work for the community? From what I'm reading, not necessarily at this time, but it still doesn't mean it's something that shouldn't be considered.
So there are 15 enumerated comments from July 29, 2024 that are in our packet. We are not going to move through each of those 15. We're going to address those, unless someone wants to do something different, as we go through these zoning districts. But as this is on our agenda, does anyone have a question of clarification on the Planning Commission or a comment to underscore related to any of these 15 enumerated comments that came from the July 29th meeting? Also keeping in mind, we're not addressing this until we see where it fits with the zoning. But are there any comments of clarification that you want to ask about these items? Okay. Is that what you had in mind for this line in the agenda?
Well, no, so in going through these comments, the big things that we found when coding these comments, roughly 3 to 4 main topics come out. These are not surprising, but the biggest issue that's coming, that as from a qualitative research perspective, what I'm seeing was that the R1 district, there was a real want by the individuals who were participating in that meeting to limit the uses available in the R1 district, to limit the definition of family to limit occupancy in a single-family dwelling. And then also, as it relates to other residential uses, making sure that the want was to have the R1 district being solely for single-family dwellings, detached. Looking at the next item that comes up, it's the chickens and bees proposal. Across the board, that's no. No one that wrote about that comment or topic was in favor of it. Doesn't, like I said, that was included. It's best practices. If it doesn't work for the community, then it's not going to be a best practice. It's going to be a failure. So we want to make sure that maybe this isn't something covered in the ordinance. That's what staff's going to suggest. Additionally, when it comes to that R1 district, I'm going to suggest that we look into having limited occupancy from the current standard of no more than 4 unrelated individuals. And then also, we need to probably have a discussion about apartment conversions in the R1 district. Then the next item this is substantially less. So like I had 23 comments related to R1, 10 comments related to the chickens, but then like 4 comments, there's individuals that are concerned about building heights. One of the things that came up in the comments and then some of the other meetings having the potential for the height standard and a floor standard. Some of the comments that weren't coded as being against the increased height of the revitalization district encouraged having more of the incentives so right as it is right now, the draft only, you have to have one of the 4, I guess, sweeteners, so to speak, but like having the parking integrated into the building, LED building design, green space. People want to see more of those types of requirements placed into that, into the ordinance to allow, if an individual or a developer wanted to have increased height, then they'd be able to, if they, as opposed to just having like one green space and then being able to go higher. Of that though, there were 4 comments critical of building height. One thing that was not noted in the comments, and this is, I said 3 to 4, the 4th is, I only had 1 comment that was identified as we're actually seeking more residential building opportunity. Once again, we're giving you best practices. It's well known that there is a housing shortage in the county and the country, and that it's not getting any easier to build housing. So this is one of those times where as a planner, I grit my teeth. This is what the community wants. This is what we can make happen. Naturally, it does, that kind of sentiment goes against what the comprehensive plan was envisioning, but it's something that the Planning Commission and Borough Council will have to work out. Other than that, the comments as presented, many of the changes to the zoning map are relatively on a parcel by parcel basis. We've been receiving a few complaints, not complaints, but questions and concerns regarding one parcel in particular that is zoned as proposed as being R1A. That's the preservation district for residential. It's currently zoned R1. What's unique in that instance is the R1A would actually be an upzone, as they would have the ability to have short-term rentals there. That's something we may want to think about either restricting or, to Mr. Seitz' perspective, looking into what type of, if we want to have a like compounding as opposed to having, so like when I say compounding, like R1 being absolute lowest, R2 maybe having more uses that are higher density residential. I don't necessarily think it's something that we can't change relatively with the text, but I don't anticipate that requiring full-scale new additions to the map or additional districts. But that's the information that staff wanted to convey tonight.
That was very helpful, thank you. And what we're doing here is laying things on the table for consideration in a minute when we move through these districts. And if I could paraphrase what you said, it sounds like there is a cluster of comments related to the R1 district, from the uses to the, and that would include chickens and bees. But there's a cluster around R1 that came up at that meeting. Then there was a set of comments related to building height, and then a third, but maybe smaller amount that had to do with residential uses and residential opportunities.
I think the residential flows into that R1 component. The comment specifically related to more residential, was related to the general commercial district. In addition, the industrial district that has come up in a previous meet at the 20th.
Okay.
20th or previously, that might be an opportunity looking to increase residential opportunities in some of those more commercial/industrial districts. So.
And did you get a total count of how many community members were there, just so that we have a context for how much?
We had 30 sign-ins. That's not to say there weren't more. Unfortunately, I was unable to see the meeting. I was able to hear and participate verbally, but I was on the screen for I think 5 seconds before we had technical problems. And that won't be occurring again. So it'll be the 29th. I'll be live and in person.
Okay, great. Okay, so Planning Commission, that's one set of comments from that one meeting that are enumerated here, and we'll take in turn as we move through the districts. Did anyone want to say anything about this? Item A, those comments? Okay, then the second were from when we actually met here in the last business meeting on July 15th. And John, I would ask if you could just remind us, if you could now, if not, we'll revisit this later. There are some items that we left on the table at that meeting that we were going to return to, both that included new language that we suggested from Section 1 and some definitions in Section 5.
So I have the definitions. The changes to 1 are, I wouldn't say they're substantial changes, but they are, we have some numbering issues and also just cleaning up some of the purpose statements of the ordinance. As it relates to the definitions, the last meeting really it was relatively light in terms of the specific changes. I mean, we had some duplicates that occur, so like condominium is in there twice, making sure that we just have this cleaned up. Making sure that motor vehicle, getting rid of that terminology, having it just so we're encapsulating all forms of mobility as opposed to just, I say all forms of mobility, let me back up. All forms of transit or transportation outside of walking or pedestrian activity. Then finally, a tour guide, expanding that to ensure we're capturing walking tours, Segway tours, horse-drawn carriage tours, not exclusively horse-drawn carriage tours, I should say. But that's what I have for that information. We will be, so with the changes to the document that we'll be getting out, I guess the goal will be to get that out by the end of this week, most likely the middle of this week if I can swing it on Thursday or Wednesday, sorry. We will be able to have the revisions to Section 1 identified as well.
So just as a reminder, at that meeting in July, we didn't finish everything. We gave some staff recommendations, which you said you'll have soon.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have to circle back to some of those definitions that we didn't finish, and that'll be later in the process.
And there's also, as we discussed last month, there are definitions kind of littered throughout the document, which if it's in the Planning Commission's interest, we can take those out of Section 3 and put them into the definitions, which that's something that staff would be more than willing to do.
Do any Planning Commission members have anything more to comment on the July 15th meeting? Okay, then here's the big part, and I hope the fun part. I hope we can keep this kind of exciting because it's potentially exciting or it's potentially destructive, depending on how it goes. But everyone is ready to discuss sections 2 and 3. We'll begin today, we won't finish today, and we'll move from district to district. And that, for all of those of you out there and for the Planning Commission, section 2 begins on page 25 of the zoning ordinance proposed revision, and section 3 begins on page 59. So we'll have to kind of move back and forth. Of course, we'll also potentially move back and forth between the existing ordinance. Are you prepared, John, and I apologize for not queuing you up on this one, to, if we could, bring up the existing ordinance if it's necessary?
Yeah,
Is that easy
yeah.
to do? Or-
Yeah, well, it's not as, yes, I do apologize to individuals watching on TV because it will be just text,
Yeah,
so.
okay. So let's start. If we turn to page 25, the first district is R1.
Yeah, so in looking at the ordinance, the proposal would have three main groups. We'd have residential districts, mixed-use districts, which that captures the commercial, and then those special districts where we're talking the civic institution, healthcare, and industrial. The overlay districts are identified in the ordinance, however, they're not really zoning related. The floodplain overlay is established by the National Flood Insurance Program. Those are your 1% zone AE riverine flood areas. We cannot change those without having to go through a very, very fun process. That's what I was doing training for last week. The historic overlay is actually related to the historic district. That is a zone, so to speak, but it's not related to your land use regulations. It's more related to architectural design standards for the historic district in keeping with Department of Interior guidelines. So to begin then, R1, that is the low-density residential. Purpose for this district, it's where your single-family detached housing is generally located. If this were any other, well, we're in Pennsylvania, if this were a jurisdiction in an area that had the ability to annex land, that's generally what you're coming in as your lowest density use. And this is low-density residential is one step above agriculture, so to speak. The design guide for this is provided on page 28. You can see how the parcel would be envisioned. It's not necessarily large. Where's the minimums? Okay, so in terms of your lot area, there is no minimum lot area. However, you do have a minimum width, 60 feet. There's some minor building separation requirements, and then a very substantial requirement for open space. The uses in the R1, let me go forward quite a bit. So our use table begins on page 61 of the document. You'll see that R1 constitutes our community residential group home district, single-family detached, and manufactured home by right. As it relates to manufactured home, this is something I actually got into a conversation with the consultant about. Manufactured homes are very unique and special types of housing, as they have a permanent body on frame chassis as opposed to a permanent foundation. Having said that, you can remove the chassis and do a title to deed conversion, and then that manufactured home is a house. So we kind of have to allow it. If we're going to require that the structure be on a permanent foundation, it's not really a manufactured home anymore. And that's a comment that has come up. I can understand the concern. One of the issues when it comes to manufactured housing is it's generally a depreciating asset, even if it is on a permanent foundation. They're not designed to a traditional standard, even though they are designed at a standard that meets all current federal requirements. It's something that's unique with a manufactured home, and it also has a clear stigma associated with low income. So that's something that even if you were, say, open to having mixed income neighborhoods, the presence of manufactured housing can be detrimental in that it declines the overall area's valuation. So when you're looking at comps, and it takes time, but it can have impacts down the line that are unintended. So that's why it's there. It's something that we're not necessarily recommending manufactured home communities, so a clustering of these, that would be something that would require special exception permission in the R2 district. But given our land, the physical availability, that's going to be very challenging to have a mobile home community. So,
John, can I just help you one
Yep.
second, just so that maybe we can, this is very helpful. I was wondering, though, if we could begin each district with any comment related to the boundary lines first. So that's number one. And then second, any comment related to, do we like or not like the purpose statement? So that would be number two. Number three, so I'm talking about the purpose statement for R1 being on page 27. Number three being the design graphics. And I've said for a while that I like these graphics, although we have had some comment about the graphics, so we might want to talk about the graphics. That's on page 28. So number three would be the design or regulation related to the design. And then getting back to where you just were, item 4 being the use, and then you can walk through that. So
Good.
this is a little tedious, and some districts might be more tedious than others, but it's important. So how about we start with boundary lines for the R1? Have there been any comments that the Planning Commission has heard from the public? This would also, because Planning Commission sort of operates this way, if anybody in the public wants to make a comment now, within reason, we'll take it. But anything related to the R1 boundary lines on this map that we would choose to change from the proposed? I should also mention Chad Claybaugh is over there too, so please also jump in and help us. You've been part of this from the beginning. So anything related to the boundary lines? Yes. Yes.
Hi, Mary Minor, 322 Gettys. I've been watching these maps. I did not bring them with me. I've made comments on papers at the farmer's market, because there was a little presentation there one week. Would you please just go through the colors? I am not a map person, and help me understand what I'm looking at. That map is fuzzy-wuzzy to me up there. It's
So-
clear to my eyes. I don't
Yeah.
understand it.
So for Ms. Minor, could you just spell out the R1, where the R1 is?
so the R1 is this very light beige, almost white color. You can see Colton Park down to the south, the traditional areas that you'd think of as single-family detached housing.
Will you point out where the hospital is, please? That would help me orient.
So the hospital is this bluish area right to the north.
And then, okay, I see the green is the rec park and the creek running through it. Okay. Helps me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. So there are more or less 4 R1 neighborhoods in the borough, I believe.
Yeah.
More or less, 4 distinct, well, common R1 neighborhoods. Does anyone on the Planning Commission have anything to say about those boundary lines? Ms. Monahan?
Yes. How have they changed from what they were or what they are now, please?
This is where it gets tricky, if you could toggle. There is a graphic that
Yeah.
allows you to do that.
I'm going to pull that up. It's not, there are a few parcels that have changed since this graphic was designed, but I do not believe they affect the R1. That was more of not an issue, but something we changed with a few of the parcels as it relates to NC1. So as you can see, maybe you can see, let me pull this over a little bit. Maybe. Come on, there we go. So this area
So no change at Colt Park that we
Yeah.
can see.
There's some slight changes in this neighborhood. You'll see the one I mentioned, this parcel right here was R1, and it's currently R1. We're proposing it to be rezoned to R1A. The reason for that, the park actually has the delineation, the military park, that cuts like this. We're not quite sure where, this parcel, you actually access it from Red Patch. So it seems to be a historic artifact in that regard, but there's some other parcels that were R1 that they're also going into this civic institutional. We have to be cognizant of the fact that any property that's in that delineation is at severe opportunity, severe opportunity of being purchased by the National Battlefield Trust and converted to no use. Up here, there's, changes to this area. I want to say this one is, which was the change with that? Is that the location where we already have a, Chad, I'm looking at you with a potential
Subdivision.
subdivision right here?
Seminary property.
Yeah. Whoa. Sorry about that. And then going further up, so here's Broadway. You can see that that's a few parcels to the south are now being changed. Right there. And some of these are this would be an upzone to R2.
What is that property?
This is Carlisle Street.
It'd be the Paxton Motel,
Lincoln.
Paxton Hall.
And over here, you'll see no real changes. There's some delineation going on with this current industrial zone right here.
All right, thank you for that. Have there been any property owners during this process who have brought this to your attention? I'm aware of one on Red Patch.
Red Patch is the only one that we've been hearing about, and that's, I had conversation with the property owner who didn't seem very concerned. I think the neighbors are concerned with the potential for short-term, short-term lodging being eligible on that one property everyone would have to be traveling on their road to go to. But that's something we can look into with R1A.
Okay, yeah, I certainly would suggest that, because I think that property owner did come to the meeting and suggest, because her access is from Red Patch and not West Confederate, that, okay. So you'll note that one.
Yeah, that one's been noted, and that's something I understand how the mapping was made. If it makes sense to keep the current R1 for that parcel, I don't think at the end of the day there's going to be any physical change to the neighborhood as either way, but it would potentially go a long way to easing any potential concerns from the neighbors.
Planning Commission, other comments about this R1 boundary? Okay, what about the purpose statement that appears on page 27? And And that statement says the purpose of the R1 district is to provide for certain areas of the borough to be maintained as residential areas, primarily for single-family detached housing. Okay, then the regulation regarding design that we see on page 28.
With this, it really does not provide for a whole bunch of changes. It does give a nice layout, though, for any potential single-family home construction that could occur. I will note, as infill development goes, single-family detached dwellings generally are something that you would see. And I say that because in the past 8 months, I have not seen a single-family dwelling permit application come before the planning department. So we don't necessarily have a whole lot of demand for building single-family dwellings, but.
I was curious about the dimension standards. I think because you mentioned this number, I was thinking about it. So the lot width, you said, is a 60-foot minimum at front setback. So I just clicked on a couple randomly, some properties around the Springs Avenue neighborhood, and they seem to be about 45 feet wide or 50 feet wide. So I was wondering where that 60-foot came from, if that's a typical urban lot size. We should think about trying to align that more with what's typically found in those districts.
It would be, it probably is a little bit larger than what our built environment is for the R1. A good standard, so the state of Maryland, this was about 15 years ago, they came up with, for their priority funding areas, you had to have, what was it? At minimum lot area sizes for residential at 1/3 of an acre. The Commonwealth of Virginia, afterward, they did something similar, 4 units per acre. By not having that lot area, it encourages more traditional single-family lots. It also discourages more compact housing types, so you wouldn't see like shotgun-style housing. It wouldn't necessarily be. It wouldn't be practical to build it in the R1 district. This is to encourage those larger single-family homes. You could have an attached garage, the typical. I'm going to be kind of critical right now, suburbia. So if it's something that I think we could probably get to a standard that's smaller and you'd still maintain an R1 feel.
That's my thought. I mean, I think that even though there's probably not a lot of space or a lot of ability for infill development in the R1, we do have those 2 areas that are shown in where the seminary is, where it seems like a 60-foot minimum lot width would not provide the kind of density we're trying to allow for in the borough, as far as if we're trying to increase affordable or any kind of housing in the borough. And I think I was trying to remember when this commission a couple of years ago, and it was a different district, I guess would have been the R2.
Yeah.
We actually made it an effort to allow for increased density by narrowing lot widths. And I think that's something we should still consider, even in the R1 district, is that there can be housing types compatible with that district that aren't necessarily very large houses, single-family houses that I think are in some of the bigger lots in the borough. If there are 45 width lots within, like I said, the Seminary or Springs Avenue neighborhood, which I think we all can agree is a very attractive neighborhood, I think we should reconsider that 60-foot width.
If I could chime in there, so
old ordinance states 75 feet, so it would be a slight improvement there. But yeah, if we still have existing nonconformities, I would think we'd want to maybe try and match some of that up. But that's just a recommendation. Or maybe we stick with existing nonconformities.
Well, if the commission would be of consensus that we should reevaluate the lot areas, staff can provide some modifications to consider.
I'm just concerned that beyond the areas you mentioned at the seminary, that it doesn't appear, by my looking at the map, that there are a lot of other areas where that would be desirable.
Well, I mean, my point is that if the lots are already smaller than 60 feet, so why would we just create a bunch of non-conforming lots anyways? What is a 60-foot wide lot in the district, in those districts? I mean, I feel like the majority probably is smaller than that. How big is your lot?
I don't know.
I'll measure it right now.
Sure. Well, could we circle that? My question was, and this has come up with the entire set of districts, the 45 max and the 25 max. I thought that we had, during the old discussion on the ROR, put everything at 12 feet stories as opposed to, we started to think in stories of 12 feet, so that would be 48. And have you noted inconsistencies related to that throughout the proposal?
Well, so in drafting the document, the use of floors as a measure of height was not necessarily something that we were able to get a lot of consensus on. The issue, and Chad can probably get into this more detail, but a floor can be 10 feet. I think the absolute minimum per international building code is 7 feet. You can have a floor, you can have an atrium, like your ground floor be like have 20-foot ceilings, look all nice. It's still one floor. So I think the concern we were hearing from the public was more about the physical height of a building as opposed to the design height, if that makes sense.
Well, I was just suggesting that in some places it's 45 feet, but if you go over to the to NC2, it's 48. And so my interest is in consistency on 45 and 48 throughout.
And, yeah, I'm pulling up the current R1 district standard. I believe that's a carryover. I can confirm that maybe relatively quickly.
You
But-
remember, Chad, this whole discussion? I think you were part of this.
Yeah, so both of the things you're saying is accurate. We started going down the path of 12-foot increments, which is why the 48 feet showed up. And then we started realizing that that's not necessarily a good idea. The existing ordinance, I believe, has 45 feet. So it was a carryover from the existing ordinance.
Okay.
I don't disagree with your point, though. 45, 48, it's pretty close, within 3 feet. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is whenever you're looking at building height, it's the average building height over the face of the property, right? So on the one side, it might be, if 45 is the total, it might be 43 on the one side, and it might be 49 on the other side, so.
Okay.
It's
So this
something-
isn't a major.
Yeah,
It's not major.
I would say I like your idea of just making it the same, though. If we want to use 45, make it 45 everywhere.
I think going the other way would probably be more beneficial because I think the R1's the only one that has that 45 feet. And functionally, that's not going to result in a grotesquely larger structure, I should say.
Well, then I'd be comfortable keeping R1 at 45 then, and the rest at 48. Anyone? And then revisiting this topic about width?
Yeah.
Okay. So how about use? That's where a lot of comment has been. So the use chart is on page 61. And if everyone wants to look at, you had gotten as far as, I think, family detached or conversion. There's a lot of discussion, I'll just say, in the community about multifamily conversion. And maybe you could tell us if that's new or not. So that's one. Manufactured home, which is what you were speaking to for R1. and
Yeah.
wireless facilities. If you want to go down that list with us very quickly, maybe.
Certainly. So we received some concern about group home. That's something I can understand the concern that individuals would have, but looking at best practices, especially for individuals in recovery, it makes the Oxford House model is considered a pretty good standard for allowing for reentry into society, and it requires their treatment program specifically requires that the group home be put into a traditional residential area as opposed to a commercial area. There's some just the research showing that it's more beneficial and more productive to have the positive change. The multifamily conversion, so that's what we currently call apartment conversion. Mr. Redmond brought up a point a few months ago about the benefit for multifamily conversion is the structure maintains the design of a single-family dwelling while still allowing for increased density. So you don't have the rhythm and harmony of the block isn't negatively affected, and it's an opportunity for preservation of some of the historic structures. A good one for that would be currently 202 Carlisle Street, fire damage structure. That's going to be a multifamily dwelling. It was traditionally used as a boarding house, so it already had a higher density, but that's one of those aspects where you have a development coming in that's going to maintain the historic characteristics of a structure, and they're not going to be building an apartment building. So that's why it's there. It's why it's also a special exception. Then going down, no lodging uses are permitted in the R1. For civic and institutional type of uses, the police, fire, and EMS, which is in every district, is allowed, but otherwise hospitals, libraries, places of worship, schools, stadiums, neighborhood assemblies, cemeteries, and government facilities are not permitted. Forestry and open space, you can have forestry, you can't really have open space or shooting ranges. Commercial uses, you'll see there's almost none, I believe there's none, with the exception of wireless communication, that's infrastructure uses, with the exception, I should say, of there is always the opportunity to obtain a special exception for a home occupation with conditions that are very restrictive. Wireless communication facilities, once again, those are required to be in every single district. They're already in the right-of-ways. Industrial uses are only permitted in industrial districts. And then we have the accessory dwelling unit. Those are permitted in the R1 district. Child care center, that's permitted. So that's quasi-commercial use. Home occupation, once again, special exception. We have the keeping of chickens, keeping of honeybees. I guess if I were looking at this ordinance today after receiving those comments, we would remove keeping of chickens and keeping of honeybees from this ordinance. In speaking with the Borough Council President, he's okay with that. The understanding is that while this is something that would be beneficial for the borough, the community is being pretty vocal about not wanting it in the neighborhood. And that's fine. We can work with that. The final one then is temporary outdoor events. They're relatively allowed in every district, although for the residentials, you have to have special exception.
Well then, John, let's start with chickens and honeybees, given you just said that. And I would agree that I've heard no comment related to this being acceptable in R1. But if anyone on planning has a different opinion, please state it before we might advise staff to remove those from the R1.
I just wanted to know, what is the concern with chickens?
Waste, noise, and quality of life issues.
So are they imagining industrial chicken houses? Is that what they're thinking is going to happen?
No, it was just any animal waste, no, not any animal, but waste from chickens being potentially problematic. There is a health concern. I mean, generally, the health department does review the location of coops because there are sanitary issues that can occur that are unique to chicken coops. So it's not an unusual concern.
I didn't actually look at this, but is there a section in the ordinance that talks like the limitations on what the chickens would be, the numbers, and
Yes.
I assume
Yes.
there's,
Yeah, pulling that up slowly. Here, let me just do this.
As you do that, though, it's also in the borough code that poultry is not permitted anywhere in the borough, so that would have to be amended at the same time.
That's correct.
and I assume that it limited it to chickens and to hens, not roosters.
That's
Correct,
correct.
that's correct.
So, what?
What do you do with the roosters? Because you buy chickens, heaps, you're gonna get roosters. I heard there was a plan in the past that there was a farmer that was gonna take roosters. So I guess the borough that would then condone the murder of roosters, then it would do a choice. That's what you do with roosters. How many
Right.
folks here have had chickens?
All right, well,
Who recommended them for-
are you starting to go down a road of not wanting to remove this from R1?
Well, I just want to know
'Cause-
what the concerns were, I wanted to know if they were,
Well, I would say it the other way, that there's no one that I know that's been advocating it from R1. You've said best practices, but I'm not,
yeah, does that mean that certain municipalities have faced a request for chickens and had legal issues not permitting them? Is that why, is this case law that's
It's-
resulting in this?
So in my own practice, it's a very contentious issue. It's all of the same, what would be NIMBY issues, not in my backyard. They all relate around quality of life, and chickens seem to have the way to make people think about their quality of life a little bit differently than other animals. We don't hear these concerns. We have a pig that's in the borough that doesn't quite meet the definition of a animal that would be regulated. We haven't heard any concerns about that. It's something, even I believe there's a horse somewhere in the borough living inside, like that, and that's oddly, you can get away with being a service animal and having like miniature ponies, but all the comments since we've put this into the ordinance has been overwhelmingly negative against having the use availability. And then when I go on to planning.org to look at the American Planning Association, they're saying most jurisdictions are moving towards allowing more chickens. So that's where we came in. We should think about this. Well, we're thinking, and this is where we are.
And it's 3 chickens per acre.
Yeah.
They tend to be contentious
Yeah.
in
I'm
a
just-
town setting.
Right.
I think there's advocates for and advocates strongly against, and I don't think that's unique to the borough of Gettysburg.
it seems to me there have not been strong advocates for that have surfaced in the borough so far, so we might be just inviting something that's not really.
Generally speaking, in my experience, the people who are strong advocates are those who themselves want to have chickens rather than chickens as a concept.
And then what happens? Do they sue the borough for not allowing chickens?
I've never had to deal with that.
But if they're,
Let's not find out.
In my practice, what has occurred is we've received complaint in other jurisdictions from the property owners that butt the coop, and they're the ones that are calling the police.
Some deal with it by special exception.
So my question is, John, if we're saying, we're talking about the R1 right now, so if we're saying that we don't want it there, are we saying we don't want it in any of the uses, or are we trying
no,
to?
we're not there yet. No, I don't think so.
Right, so the question is do you have to allow it somewhere, otherwise, does it become a use by special exception?
I'm not sure that the keeping of chickens is a land use.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to allow it, and you wouldn't have to acknowledge a request for a special exception. You can just say no,
I
it's
don't
not allowed.
consider that to be a land use. If you're establishing it in the zoning ordinance as something by right, there it is, but it's not a land use in and of itself that would give rise to the right to have special exception. It wouldn't fall into that catch-all category, in my opinion.
Can I just ask a question? You just mentioned the 3 chickens per acre. chickens shall be permitted for the first 1 acre. So you would have to have an acre in order to have chickens, right?
Is that right, John?
Or does it say up to for the first acre? Yeah, it's hard, it is, that is also unclear.
But if we take it out, we don't have to deal with it.
That's true. I think what we were trying to say is that you need to have an acre to have more than 3 chickens. So that didn't come through clearly, but we haven't addressed that because of
I see Mr. English trying to get in here, but I first wanted to just ask, are you still advocating against removing it?
Well, I mean, this seems like an issue that we've neither had any request for chickens or anyone who wants chickens. And so I think we've created a problem because no one
Yeah,
has seemed to
that's
want
what I was-
chickens in the borough. But I personally I've never owned chickens, but I have taken care of other people's chickens, and I've never experienced the problems that it seemed to be the concern with, like, that this does limit them in such a way that it seems like to be very minimal.
What do others think?
But if there's been no people who want chickens in the borough, then I think we could wait until someone wants to have chickens.
I know that we're just talking about R1 right now, but I think it makes sense to consider all the other uses as well, you know,
The
to
other districts.
decide, the other districts, right, to decide on chickens and bees or not. You know, and I'm inclined, based on public comment, to say no, and precedent too. You know, we've maintained a pretty chicken-free borough.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. English.
Well, what about a compromise, if there'd be a community chicken area, maybe in Gara, or somewhere where you can put your pollinator, you can have your apiary set up, community garden, community penthouse. I mean, there's other ways to do this instead of 3 chickens per parcel.
Yeah, right now, the only place that you all propose this is R1 and R1A, not an institutional or industrial, as I may have thought would have been the case. Is there a reason for that?
Well, the R1 district being the closest agricultural district
Oh.
that we have in the borough.
But if Gettysburg College wanted chickens,
If they're doing it, I imagine we could probably work with them to spin it in such a way that the curriculum for a course, so it's not necessarily going to be chickens as a use, it would be more in keeping with their teaching aspects or research aspects.
does anyone object to removing chickens as recommended by right in the R1 district? Anyone opposed to removing that as part of our recommendation for now? What about honeybees? I also have not heard anyone advocating for this in R1, and I've heard a lot of comment about allergies and other things like that. But I'm no expert on this at all.
This was another one, it feels like ages ago, pre-pandemic. There was a very large concern with pollinator habitat, being able to sustain colonies, as there were numerous instances of colony collapse, I believe disease or just once again, best practice. Bees are something that you can't control coming onto your property as is, or almost you can't control. It's not something that's necessarily crazy. There is a niche for the product. It provides individuals an opportunity to have a hobby and then also have an income. But it's one of those things. I was a little hesitant when we were first discussing it because it is in a more residential area. You are potentially opening yourself up to concerns about individuals being stung, liability concerns on the property owner, and then that can go on and on. So once again, we're presenting it. We didn't mean to upset the community with this. It's just a recommendation based on what other communities are doing.
Gotcha, thank you. If we decided to recommend to remove that, would anybody object to that? John saying no, Marty? No? No, okay. Well, maybe it will resurface in a future time. Or maybe council will put it back in, but I think we're responding to the comments we've received so far. I realize we're spending a lot of time on R1 here, so let's move forward on our, go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to go back to, into residential uses. I didn't see it defined. What does dwelling staff housing mean?
Okay, let me pull that up.
which is not a permitted use, I'll just add, but I was trying to imagine what staff housing was and if that,
And we're not finished with R1, I would just.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, we're staying on R1 for a little while, we have more items here.
So staff housing is the housing for
Okay.
bona fide full-time employees of basically the university, seminary, or healthcare facility. And that's a big one when we're talking about healthcare uses, because nowadays you can't, your nursing staff and even some of the doctor staff, they'll be rotating in and out.
So that is currently not permitted, are you?
right, yeah, yeah, thank you, that clarifies that.
So what about accessory dwelling units? Is that currently permitted?
So the current ordinance does not really have accessory dwelling units as a concept. The current ordinance, you are allowed to have multiple principal buildings on one parcel. So in theory, you could have multiple detached single-family dwellings. One of those dwellings could have previously been used as a garage. It meets the general gist of an accessory dwelling unit. The rub is that you cannot do attached accessory dwelling units. So like having turning your basement into an apartment isn't something it's not necessarily feasible in the current draft, or the current ordinance. Let me pull up the dwelling. So what we're proposing here, this will allow for, where is it? As long as there is a separate entrance, you can have one attached to the structure. So that avoids a situation where you're creating internal hallways that aren't going to meet aren't going to meet property maintenance code or IRC codes. You keep that. It turns it into an apartment as opposed to being like a spare bedroom or a temporary lodging use type of situation. This accessory dwelling units, in particular, there's a national trend towards what's called missing middle housing. This fits into that. Individuals, I mean, when you have houses starting in the low 800s, not everyone can afford them. And it's not necessarily low-income individuals that can't afford housing. This is where you get these opportunities to have market rate housing opportunities across the board.
Okay, so I bring this up, and this is something I hope that council can, or commission can talk about for a second. There is maybe a concern about a district that is identified in its purpose statement as being single-family low density. It's in fact the definition of that district being part of this effort to increase density. I, of course, understand the arguments for that. Several people have laid them out, but there is also some community concern about changing the R1 to be more dense than it is. So I think we need to talk about this, starting with accessory dwelling units and also including the multifamily conversion. And it would be great if the commission could weigh in on what your thoughts are related to that.
Well, my take on it is that the examples I can think of apartments that exist in the R1 is that they are successful examples of increasing density in a way that aligns with the community character. I have friends who live on Springs Avenue on second-floor apartments or in some of those larger homes that have kind of attached apartments to them, and I've heard of no complaints of those existing in that district. And I was thinking about this with we already passed that part of the definition, but I think that, we are trying to allow for that creative way to allow for more housing in the borough with multifamily conversions and accessory dwelling units. And so by allowing those, it does make the purpose of that district seem inconsistent to say that the goal is to not have conversion to other uses that are not owner occupied, such as conversion apartments. I think that last part could be struck since we are permitting those things by either special exception or by right.
Are you talking about R1A or R1?
Oh, sorry, that is R1A.
Yeah.
Thank you.
R1 statement is much
Oh,
simpler
yes,
than
it is,
R1A.
yes, okay.
The old ordinance said, one of the purpose statement for R1A was to.
Or R1 or R1A? I was reading the wrong one.
R1A, the old ordinance, was to allow bed and breakfast and to provide income to maintain large dwellings without conversion to other uses. So I.
Yeah, sorry,
don't know.
I skipped ahead. I was looking at the wrong
We're
definition,
just-
wrong purpose. I should have been sticking to R1.
So if there is, does the commission believe there should be a district in the borough in which density is limited and not part of an effort to increase, which is somewhat behind many of the other reforms? Would you agree with the way I'm saying that?
Yeah, especially, I mean, most of the comments we got regarding the R1 district were that people don't want to have increased density.
Yeah. And I don't want to speak too much about this because I live in this district and I hear it, but I want others maybe to weigh in on what you think.
I just got from our planning director that we would be going against the comprehensive plan of allowing for more residential development. And there is a need for more residential development. So I just want to point that out. We're not necessarily creating a community for us, but it would be for the next generation. I personally feel like in terms of sustainability and providing quality dwellings for people, housing, that I would be in favor of allowing for increased.
So could there be any way to split or to do some compromises where accessory dwelling is permitted but not multifamily conversion? Or do you see both as required for that comprehensive plan?
I think one of the ways you could split this for the R1 district, because that is a unique low-density district, is keeping the status quo where you could have detached accessory dwelling units that are subordinate to the main structure, principal building, but not having those where you end up creating a quasi-two-family duplex dwelling.
What do you all think of that?
That sounds favorable to me. I would take the recommendation of our.
So that would require us removing a couple of these items? Or,
What we could do, even if you even want to restrict it further, is making it a special exception in the R1 district, and then putting in an intent statement that the R1 district shall have no attached accessory dwelling units.
No attached accessory dwelling units. So you couldn't convert your attached garage to an apartment for your mother-in-law?
That's correct.
Or you're someone who is your healthcare while you're trying to age in place?
That would be a result, yes.
yeah. Yes, you are, yes.
So the multi-dwelling, I don't know what the pure definition is going to be conversion, if it's 2 or more, 3 or more, 4 or more, or 5 or more, to retain the integrity. The one thing I don't find is that in the R1, shouldn't it be applied that the principal owner of the property has to reside there at the same time?
John?
No, that would not be consistent with current practice, because you can have a rental, single-family
Yeah.
dwelling.
Right, okay, so, but if you start turning into 3 units, then you're starting to convert it from totally single family, and there's no one that has any tie to the property there.
I mean, That's something that the plan commission should take into account. That there'd be an opportunity for multiple accessory dwelling units in some of these situations.
That's a good comment, and makes this all the more complex, trying to sort through the concept of increasing density within reason, but also, the purpose says single-family detached housing. That's the purpose of the district.
Well, it says that areas primarily for single, I mean, I don't think there's any risk at this point of any of those neighborhoods as becoming more than primarily single-family. I think it's, at this point, it's fairly unique to have any apartment conversions in those neighborhoods. But I personally have no problem with them. I think if we saw more of those, it would create more opportunities for housing in the borough.
Yes.
Yes.
It says, occupied by family relations of the primary residence. Is that across the board? You could only have like a mother-in-law, you could only have a second unit if it was occupied by a family member? Or am I misreading that?
Unit will be considered accessory dwelling unit if one located in a separate structure. Separate entrance provides cooking facilities, bathroom, and occupied by family relations of the,
If that's not the intent, and I know those are hard to enforce.
Yeah, so family relations, that's the only time that that's occurring in the ordinance. I think when we were, I'd have to go back to look at some of my notes, but when we were writing this, the intent was to keep it so that it's not gonna be like limited to family members, but it would be limited in some manner. So I can't answer that question very well right now. I'll say, if it's something that the planning commission would like, what I'm gathering from this discussion is we need to probably give you all some options as it relates to accessory dwelling units in the R1 district and possibly the R1A district. That's something we can have prepared for the next meeting.
So with that stated, and I realize that this is very complicated, and as when we pull one thread, more threads come. It sounds to me that there is an interest in preserving limited density or low density in the R1, and yet there is also an interest in providing greater housing, as the comp plan has said, and as the directives for the consultant were said. So we're going to have to revisit R1. And with these things laid out on the table, the only thing we've accomplished so far, but it's a good accomplishment maybe, is that we are recommending that you remove the chickens and the honeybees, and that we are going to revisit these items related to multifamily conversion, add into that manufactured home, add into that group home for us to revisit at the next meeting. And then I suggest we move to the commercial districts where it might be a little different, specifically the one that came up during the public comment. But Mr. Seitz, what would you want to say? Yep.
I hear Sarah's comment, I hear the comment about creating more density in the borough. You have other opportunities to do that, multifold, in all the other districts. R1 has an intended purpose, okay? And I think actually your industrial zone is closer to agriculture than the R1 is, to be honest with you. Because in today's world, agriculture is no longer a single-family farm lot as it used to be. So I think you have more possibilities to see the industrial agriculture in the industrial zone than you do agriculture in the R zone. But I think you ought to limit the R zone to what its purpose is, and that's R1. You have other opportunities to multiply exponentially your density of residents in this borough if you would look at it properly within your other districts. Secondly, real quick,
You said one comment, but
I do run on that.
okay.
Your wireless, you only have a definition for small wireless facility, but then in your allowed use, it's wireless. So is it wireless or small wireless? Because you don't have a definition strictly for wireless. Small wireless is up to 50 feet or 10% higher than the highest building adjacent. Well, your height limit in R1 is 45.
Mhm.
So how do you make that consistent?
As it relates to small wireless facilities, that's more of a right-of-way issue.
Well, a wireless facility could be a tower.
It can be, and that would be, Chad, we do have a wireless, a tower ordinance, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that somebody in an R1 district or R2 or district such as that next to your house, you're not having an 80-foot tower.
It's a good question. I think it's covered, but it's a good question and something definitely worth double
Because it
checking.
exceeds your height requirement,
45, yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you. Let's get out of residential. I appreciate that exchange as we're kind of learning about some items. We've received comment just in the last few days about some of these items, and we are going to revisit this item at our next meeting related to residential. Can I ask Chad or John to suggest, should we go to NC1 or Commercial 1 or another that might have some more, targeted discussion that won't open a larger discussion?
I think it would be best if we hold off on the NC1 discussion, because that's the R2 NC1, that
They go together.
interplay is really something that should be discussed at the next meeting. That'll be a good conversation on its own. If we want to start with the general commercial and then work from there, or even Old Town, that would be fine from my perspective.
Okay, general commercial is now called C1?
Yes.
Okay. And we do, I am appreciative of Ms. Zipperly's comments about the naming of these and the abbreviations. Let's just stay with that for a few seconds. What do you think about that some of the lettering might be confusing?
I could understand it for the revitalization, yeah, because R, that sounds like residential when you see an R and you're talking zoning. So we can, I'll go to the design, the ordinance design manual standards and see if there's some neat tricks we can use. But in terms of, general commercial, we can change that back to GC. Revitalization, that we'll have to have some.
Does anyone on planning object to that? We got a document related to that the zone R is confusing because it normally seems to suggest residential, and it is more than that now, and that general commercial has been GC and it's now called C1. Can we make a recommendation that staff relooks at those letterings?
I agree with the change.
Okay. I mean, you agreed to have them change this?
Yes,
Okay.
it's confusing the way it is currently.
Okay, so, good, there's a second kind of achievement we've made tonight as far as recommending that relook. All right, let's go to, let's just call it general commercial. Currently in the proposal, C1, but formerly general commercial. And maybe let's do the same thing. Boundary lines, purpose statement, design regulation, use. So does anyone have a comment related to the boundary line, or do you want to tell us if any of these boundary lines have changed in an important way?
Certainly. So the GC district as it currently exists, it's these red, not the dark red, that's the Old Town, but these areas near our corridors, York Street, Buford Ave, and then there's one right here below West High Street. What we've proposed, this gets kind of a little bit radical. We have this district tourism commercial right now. So what we're looking at doing is really getting rid of tourism commercial, putting that into general commercial. So Steinware would therefore become general commercial. This area, slight changes to the properties on West High Street. This area, Buford Avenue, would change from general commercial to, I believe that's NC2. Maybe I can pull up the, let's see. So it's, neighborhood commercial. I guess it's NC1 then. No, it is NC2. Sorry, I'm just talking to myself up here. And then these properties on York Street, that's where we have like the Beer Mart, there's a tire, Auto Center, North Sixth Street, North Fifth Street, there's some commercial uses there. So those are the changes for general commercial. As I noted, it's really, the gist of this district is almost Steinware exclusive now, as opposed to when that was tourism commercial. So again, the purpose of the district is to provide for the commercial development of existing street and road frontage for auto-oriented commercial establishments and activities, while advocating safe pedestrian accessibility. Like an auto center makes sense for it to be general commercial. General commercial historically was kind of like in other jurisdictions and throughout the country. You have your core business district, your Old Town district, in this case for the borough. That's where you could before cars were a thing, that was where you could do any type of commercial activity, almost any type of residential activity you wanted. Cars are special because they require parking. And that's what the general commercial area allows for, parking, as opposed to some of our more urbanized areas of the borough. Now, granted, Steinware isn't the best place for auto-oriented tourism. It's we've designed it as a pedestrian thoroughfare and walkway, and it is designed at that scale. However, we have a lot of hotels over there. That's where there's a few national chains. It is built for a different type of consumer pedestrian experience as opposed to downtown. So the cars are something that we have to work with in Steinware.
Any questions for John about how this was imagined in our proposed ordinance and the purpose statement? Or any issues with it? This is page 33, correct?
39 on the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, 39. Okay, then, nothing on the purpose? What about the design on
There's
page?
the map part.
Yeah, oh, yes, I'm sorry, the boundary, yeah. The map.
So I thought this would be the time to address
Yeah.
Sue Sipperly's comments about at least Steinware Avenue. And I agree with her point about the parcels that are now owned by the National Military Park. But I also sort of think that it's probably worth including General Pickett's Buffet, because I think it ultimately will be conveyed to the military park. So I don't see a reason to keep it in commercial at this point when its likely future is to be incorporated into the boundary of the battlefield. Although that may take a while, I guess. For the general commercial? Oh, for the, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, well, we don't know what they can take a while to convert things or to shift it to the Park Service, but
The other thing is that those last two parcels have been
they're vacant.
part of the park for
Yeah,
a
and
long
they,
time.
yeah.
And the map has always been wrong.
Is there an objection to changing that then on the map from John or from anyone on the commission? Okay, let's go with that suggestion to change that map. All right, then now what about on page 40, the general commercial design? Any significant changes here?
Not really. You'll see that the design, there's an encouraging factor for yards being necessary than for your accessory on off-street parking. However, you can have structures on the parcel that your setbacks are relatively small, side setbacks at 10 feet. You have build-to line at 15 feet. So it would be development not necessarily in keeping with the area of Steinware that's closest to Baltimore Street, but in terms of area, when you get, going closer towards like KFC and whatnot, it flows into it. And some of the parcels are even, there'd be potential opportunity for subdivision in those areas to allow for additional commercial activity in what's currently the gray space parking lots.
And did we receive any comments on this particular set of height and width?
Not
standards?
for this district, no.
Okay.
So I think you were just commenting on this, and I sort of missed it. But so I was just curious if there are parcels in these districts that would be non-conforming as far as their dimensional standards. Because you just said something about the parking. I was thinking of that area over by, I guess, Rite Aid and those commercial buildings, which to me seem to have parking forward layouts. Is the intent to try to get parking in the rear of commercial buildings, or are those going to be?
Yeah, the idea, well, yeah, we have requirements that the parking be like to the side or behind, not in the front yard. And that would be, the other thing though, when we're talking about supplemental regulations, we're really getting to a point where we're not trying to encourage parking. So it's just one of those things where there's an option for available space that we're enabling with this district.
The ordinance appears identical to what we had. The only difference I noticed was there was a building height minimum of 24 feet. Is there anything like that in this new ordinance? And can you explain why there would be a building height minimum?
It does have the 24-foot minimum. The reason for the minimum, this way we avoid single-story commercial development. So that way we're discouraging the traditional Dollar General design, lowest franchise type of design, to actually have a more pedestrian, urbanized environment. Also, one of the comments we did receive was that when we have these upper floors, making them required to be used, often we'll have, I think there's an example of the transit center where it's a large structure that's only one story when you're inside of it. So there's the option then you could have either a mixed-use dwelling or some sort of additional activity going on the upper floor, which that's a new urbanism concept from the 90s where people like being in places where the buildings are the massing is functional and is more traditional as opposed to just, I want to say, what is it, Larry Kunstler had the Anytown USA. Like if it's just strip development where you have one-story McDonald's everywhere, people really don't like that.
I think ABC falls in that same category too, Marty.
Is that also across all districts that we have minimums in each district?
No.
Other comments related to the design? Okay, then how about the use? This has more, or fewer uses. John, can you tell us any that are different or that you have received comment on?
So I received comment, a very long comment actually from Mr. Patel, the property owner of a hotel use, which a hotel in theory could be converted to what are called so it's single occupancy rental units or SEOs. You could have additional housing opportunities in the general commercial district, which, going up here, we don't, in the CI district as proposed, the only thing that's allowed is a recovery house, which, as I noted earlier, isn't best practices for recovery houses. You're allowed to have like hotels, multiple lodging uses, with the exception of boarding houses and temporary shelters requiring special exception. Motels are discouraged in this district, as are halfway houses, or not discouraged, not permitted, I should say. So we do additionally healthcare uses. That was something else that came up. General commercial may be an opportune area for additional, like not necessarily hospital, but other medical uses. They pull this down. So getting into the commercial uses section that begins on page 62. We have medical clinic, which is not permitted in the CI district. That would be one that staff would recommend we include it. Additionally, where is it? Yeah, we don't have mixed use. So potentially allowing for some kind of residential activity, either multifamily or, well, it'd be preferably multifamily in the C1 as well.
Okay, thank you. Planning Commission, any concerns or questions about the uses by right or by special exception for the C1?
So did I get that right? Apartments aren't allowed?
So I'm going right up to it again. The only permitted residential use by right or permit in what would be the general commercial district is that community residence sober living facility recovery house. So it's just blank all the way down. And so staff would recommend we look at the opportunity for dwelling multifamily apartment in that area as well. And that would be based on other jurisdictions, best practices, and comments received.
So you're asking to add that into this?
Yes.
I would support that. I assume there already are some apartments above some of those, what were probably homes at some point. There must be apartments up there already, aren't there?
Yeah.
There's stores down there or not?
And one of it's a more tragic aspect of hotels, but you end up with individuals who live in those rooms. I know from my 3 months of hotel living in Gettysburg, there were people that is where they lived.
So that would be the multifamily conversion.
This would be
Oh, sorry, that'd be the
dwelling
apartment.
multifamily apartment.
Okay, so that's what you're saying should be by right?
Yeah.
And you don't think that requires any change to the purpose statement?
No.
Okay. Are there any objections to that? Remind us again, what are the three that you just said? I'm sorry.
So allowing dwelling multifamily apartments by right in the C1 district, medical clinic would be the other one.
And what's that one under?
That's the commercial uses,
Oh, I
and
see
medical
it.
clinic is
Yeah.
on page 63.
Okay.
Any objections to that from the Planning Commission?
What about the a farmer's market? I was kind of curious that that wasn't considered there since, wasn't there at one time a farmer?
It
like
is.
a kind of, oh, gosh.
It is by right there.
No.
No,
Oh,
but, yeah, I thought there, wasn't like the area around the Heritage Center one time, didn't they have farmer's market kind of things, activities, or?
I mean, it wouldn't
Have a
be
great place
unusual
for
to
it,
have a
yeah.
roadside stand in a commercial district. You have parking there, and that's, I mean, you're driving to those types of uses. So staff would not have a problem.
I'm
with
just
that
imagining
here.
that if, for some reason the rec park kicked them out, there's a lot of parking behind, like Johns Avenue, that area. I could imagine becoming another site for it. I was just kind of curious.
So you want to add that?
Yes, let's add it.
Any issues with adding farmer's market by right, right?
All right.
Okay. Any objections to that? All right, and I'm trying to keep track of this, but it's getting a little harder with my notes on this page. You are recording this, and we'll be able to make a clean document for us.
Oh, yes. What I plan to do tomorrow and Wednesday is get that track changes of all comments that we've received and what we're talking about now and some other ideas so that we can have some additional discussion about this on the 29th.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, one
Okay,
more
go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
I don't see, am I correct in looking that Fourscore is in the general commercial?
That was one we received a comment about as well.
And they're not, yeah, the brewery, distillery, winery is not addressed in any way. So I think those are another, I personally have no problem with any of those businesses being in the general commercial by right. It's down under industrial uses on page 64.
Okay. Yeah, we included that one only in the industrial district due to the smell. Noxious odors associated with distilleries and breweries.
Has that been an issue with the distillery, the Mason-Dixon? Is actually odors coming from that?
No, it's something that you can have some pretty noxious activity happening.
And at Fourscore, they are brewing there, aren't they? I mean,
believe
they're
so.
actually brewing. I don't think have they received any complaints that you know of?
No, that would be one. I think, I wanted to say that there was something else though in the district. So we had Brew Pub.
Oh, which is brewing and, okay, so
Yeah,
it's a smaller scale.
Yeah, it's not industrial, like Anheuser-Busch setting up a shop.
So I assume those are defined differently then. There's a
Yeah.
clear way of knowing when.
Yeah, so
brewery
Brew
versus-
Pub. That's an eating place, first and foremost, that has an accessory use of on-premise production of alcoholic beverages. And there's some additional supplemental regulations that go into that, specifically related to the licensing. The brewery, I spelled that right. So we have microbrewery, microdistillery, microwinery. These are all taken from Pennsylvania's alcohol laws as they relate to the total amount of alcohol being produced at each establishment. But then once you hit a certain threshold, then you have a class license for what we would consider a brewery, distillery, or winery. And you'll see these are very restrictive, minimum lot sizes of 5 acres. We have some requirements for the distribution aspect, because in addition to the manufacturing process, creating some nuisance issues, we have the truck traffic and things associated with the distribution side. And then, so that's why the qualifications for the brewery are pretty intense.
So if I'm keeping track, we have not removed any uses from the general commercial, but we have suggested that you add language related to dwelling multifamily apartment, number 1, farmer's market, number 2, medical clinic, number 3. And was there another one?
There was.
Just those 3?
I thought you had another one, didn't you?
Well, we discussed brewery.
Oh, no, so you're not that one.
Not that one, though. Okay, so our recommendation, unless there's objection, is to add those three uses to what you would change from C1 to, or C-1 to, back to general commercial.
Yes, to make them permitted, and, yeah.
Yep. Anything else on this district? Okay, so we've had initial discussion on R1. We've had maybe complete discussion on C1. I don't think we should go back to residential at this moment. However, we should note some of the things that came up in public comment related to the lines for R2 versus commercial.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we should do that now.
No.
Okay, would you agree?
Yeah, that I would prefer to start next month's meeting with that discussion.
With that
as
discussion.
It encompasses the Elm Street overlay and also concerns with the development around the college.
But given that it's not quite 9 PM yet, are there any other, like institutional or healthcare or industrial that you think we might be able to tackle here related to any comments that came in or any planning commission comments on those three districts?
Well, how about if we mix it up, we can finish with industrial?
Sure.
That might be an easy one to tackle at this time. The comments we received from industrial were related to opportunities for residential uses, and then some parcels being zoned industrial that don't have an industrial character. With those parcels that don't necessarily have that aren't necessarily industrial, that's something staff can go through in looking at the comments to see if it would make sense to either maintain the similar style zoning to what they have now, or if individual parcels would then be potentially added into the industrial. The only issue we potentially could run into would be spot zoning, where if we were to create like an island of a parcel. I don't want to do that, even though that's not necessarily spot zoning, even though it's pretty much always thought of as spot zoning. But staff can provide some additional information on the mapping aspects of the industrial district.
Well,
The big request, though, being allowing for some form of residential in the industrial district.
Okay, and this gives us something to talk about. If we go through the boundary, purpose, design, and use again, let's just table the boundary for a minute. But purpose, on page 53, we would probably want to change this if residential was going to start to be included in industrial, because there's no provision for it here.
I agree with that. I mean, it seems like most of our industrial uses currently are not really noxious or wouldn't be incompatible with residential uses.
There is a debate about this, though, that there are some jobs that industrial brings, that if we allow industrial buildings to be transitioned into residential, that might prevent a future in that.
So this was something staff and the group discussed when we were talking about industrial uses. When you're looking at what's called brownfield redevelopment, you have some kind of chemical on site that needs to be remediated until you can bring it up to either an industrial use or getting it to a point where you could have a residential use. If you want to have some scary thoughts, I'd recommend watching the movie Dark Waters to get an idea of how PFAS and C8 work, because there's a lot of chemicals that we don't know what they do, and one day they may be harmful, and in industrial practices, they might be just dumping it on the floor. It's not to say it's happening. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but it's something we have to be cognizant of when we're redeveloping industrial sites, is that it's not as easy as any other form of infill development. Luckily, the federal government does have CERCLA and Superfund laws to allow for some form of cleanup. EPA provides brownfield remediation grants. You go through environmental site assessments to identify the pollutants, then if it is in a concentration that would warrant some form of remediation, going further to a phase 2 involuntary remediation of the site so that you can then use it. Having said all that, I guess we don't have any known brownfields in the borough. There is a Superfund site near the borough. With that, our industrial sites are primarily located along the rail. In working with Spectracoat, who recently went through a site development plan, they accept some of their, they utilize the rails. In addition to their redevelopment plan was to allow for potentially increased truck transit. Here it is. So it's not that large of a district. Most of the properties that are industrial, I mean, I'm just not seeing where it would be feasible for residential there, but it's something where if Planning Commission would like for us to explore the possibility, we could definitely change the purpose statement to reflect opportunities for owner and rental housing. And then also, as it relates to the district boundaries, then, yeah, I think I noted earlier, making sure we carve the district a little more thoroughly to reflect what's those properties that are actually being used as industrial properties today.
So if I could chime in here, so the one thing whenever I saw those comments about residential in the industrial district is East Railroad Street does have, I don't know, a couple dozen houses on it, that Cannery Alley area. So whenever they were developing this, the consultant, they always kept saying, if everything was to burn down and it was get to rebuilt, would you want those to be rebuilt there, or would you want it to just be all industrial? That's the way you have to kind of look at this with the zoning, because existing nonconformities, it can continue to have those houses in there. You have to look at it, if they were all raised and were getting rebuilt, would you like to have residential in that area, or just want to have it all industrial? But there is a couple dozen houses in that along East Railroad.
I don't know if this is a great comment to make or not, but this is one area where it would have been great, or maybe still would be great, to get the consultant's perspective on this and more of what you just described. I think there are some that would argue that Gettysburg should have a thriving kind of industrial sector, not noxious industrial, but something that is reasonable and fits in and has historically had that. But is that the reality of the market? And if not, when do we begin to encourage other uses there, like residential, to help us with this density issue? And I don't know if any of us up here really know how to answer that, but maybe you two could provide thoughts on that.
I mean, Spectracoat's expanding.
Right.
That's something that block from East Water Street down is going to, there's a real opportunity for some positive development that's going to occur as a result of Spectracoat. The areas of these parcels does not necessarily encourage industrial development, especially as it relates to like contemporary large scale. If you're looking for if you're in the market for a site ready, having a parcel that's site ready and certified, it's not going to be in a borough municipal environment. Those are generally going to be in industrial parks, operated with the Economic Development Authority or other state resources. We have to have industrial, we have to put it somewhere in the borough, but it's not something that's necessarily going to be, I guess, our driving land use challenge.
Sue?
First of all, East Railroad Street is kind of a cool little place, it's a residential strip. The only thing that's industrial is the Delphi truck engines there. And I And if that ever went out of business or wanted to downsize, I could see it being able to maybe use that as an interior mall kind of thing. Not necessarily residential, but I think it would be, have more options
General commercial.
left at general commercial.
What do you think of that?
I'd have to check with Troy to be exact, but I'm kind of thinking the logic behind having it as industrial is that you have rail access.
That came up in. The rail access was definitely something that came up, but I don't disagree with Sue's point. It currently isn't industrial. And most of the uses along there, the train doesn't stop at these places anymore. It doesn't mean that it can't or couldn't in the future. It just doesn't. So most often, those type of industrial where there's rail access is outside the borough.
Yeah, I was also interested in Sue's comments about that. I guess I'm not sure if, but I guess I would love to hear more whether or not the way to address it is by changing the district back to general commercial or looking more at the what uses are allowed in the industrial zone and maybe being more permissive there.
So using the feature of the rail, but allowing more
Yeah.
than that. Could you look into that?
Yeah.
And add that?
Yeah, so that staff will do then is we'll give you, this is what it would look like, if these parcels are being utilized as industrial, and then this is what we would be talking about for having potentially non-industrial or contemporary industrial uses in the industrial district, and then finally the
Residential piece, okay. I'm not hearing a whole lot of interest in the residential from anyone up here, though, but am I misunderstanding that? Okay. So by my count, of the 13 districts, we've made it through 2.5. Which demonstrates a need to stay after this for a couple more meetings
Yeah.
with 2 and 3. So if you could, as we plan our agenda for next time, we'll just be maybe not having to go back to R1 yet, but at least going through some of the other things that have come up here.
No, I believe at the next meeting, we'll probably have a very good discussion regarding R2
Okay.
and the NCs.
Yeah.
And then we could have the October meeting to wrap up the rest of the districts.
Okay. Well, we'll see. I hope.
Well,
We'll see.
with, the only, I guess, in terms of commercial districts, the real change for Old Town isn't so much the uses, it's the area of the district. Yeah,
Okay.
there's but the change with with RO and going to this NC phased approach, that's something that's gonna take a meeting.
So, John, we have a rezoning sort of town hall experience on August 29th. Would it be possible to have any of this staff work based on this meeting ready for that and on the website?
I'm going to be working on this tomorrow and Wednesday with
All right.
the goal of getting something on our website by the end of Wednesday, if not sooner. But, yeah, that way we could have a discussion based on all the comments and give the public some more information on where you all are going, because that's something that's been frustrating to me, and I'm sure it's frustrating to you, is there's a perception that the ordinance has already been drafted. This is the draft.
Well, I hope that this meeting shows that it is not,
Yeah.
because we are moving through it as carefully as we can. But there are some bits of information that we just don't have, which has made it a little more challenging. Now, one last comment, and thank you for answering all these questions and staying after all of this, is it possible to have that Thursday meeting at the rec park?
I haven't checked on that. I could look into it.
Could you, because the last meeting, though good, we were kind of packed in here, and it might be that it would be helpful to have more parking and in the kind of way we did the first meeting.
Okay.
And especially if you start putting things on the website related to these changes, I think more people would come out, and then we'll have more information to use. Does anyone object to that, recommending the rec park for our next meeting? If not, then we'll have it in here. But that is, I'm jumping ahead, but that's item 7B. Any other comments about where we are right now with the review of sections 2 and 3? All right, the next Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for Monday, September 16th, 7 PM, to do exactly what John Whitmore said about where we are with the districts. But previous to that, we'll have another opportunity to hear public comment from the community. Any additional comments from Planning Commission members for tonight?
Charles, if I can
Yeah, please.
say one thing. So you made a good point at the beginning of this meeting that there was no other business on our agenda. It allowed us to jump right into this. We didn't get any new plans accepted today. So at your next meeting, there will also be no other business. There could be a new plan that has to be accepted for the following month, but you'll at least go through one more meeting here with no other business. So that bodes well to continue to make hay here.
Thank you. And I want to thank the audience and the community's patience with us as we try to do this as carefully as we can. We did receive some comments just like this morning, so we'll be able to look at those a little more carefully. We weren't perhaps completely ready to respond to all of the comments we received this morning. Any other comment? Is there any public comment?
You seem to develop a structure after a while, so I think that's good.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Anything from our solicitor?
I'd echo Sue's comment. You have a lot to work through, and it's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And having structure to both your way of working through these voluminous chapters and also structure for how the public contributes, which you want them to do, is going to be important to be efficient with this.
Yeah. And we'll continue to work on that. And I do agree that I think we developed it maybe as this meeting went on, and we'll continue to work on that and refine it and make it better in conversation with everybody up here. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So John moved and Sarah seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes 5-0. Thanks, everyone. We adjourn at 9:14 PM.